Okay, welcome to Good Book. I am Nick.
And I'm Sam. We made this podcast because we love to talk about the books that we read, and we read a lot of books together already, but we also wanted to discover new books. So the way we have this set up, each week we get a random year, and we take turns choosing a book that won an award in that year.
Yeah, and hopefully the value that we're bringing to you is we're going to tell you about this book, and we're going to let you know what we think and whether or not we think you'd like it and you should get it. And then if you have read it and you want to go deeper, we'll have a spoiler cast afterwards where we can do just that. But you are safe from spoilers in this episode. This will just be informational for you, figuring out whether or not this is a book you want to read. So as always, we're going to start with just a little tidbit about ourselves and something that will be relevant to today's show. Sam, why don't you just tell me about your relationship with the fantasy genre?
I've been reading fantasy, I feel like, as long as I've been reading. I remember reading Harry Potter, and my mom got it for me, and because, of course, when your parents get you something, you don't think that's cool. So I ignored it for several years until it actually got popular, and I loved it. Then after that, I got really into Dragonlance, and I just kept reading fantasy and fantasy. Terry Pratchett, I discovered in high school. It definitely warped me and was a big part of who I became. I've read a lot of fantasy at this point. It's probably my favorite genre. I enjoy other genres, but I always go back to fantasy. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, I would say that I feel like I'm almost discovering it a little bit later in life. As a kid, I read like the Chronicles of Narnia, but there's a lot of kind of classic fantasy that I haven't read. You know, like I haven't read Tolkien, which is, I feel like that's like the standard, right? I have not read Harry Potter, so that's something I assume I will do with my kids someday. But as an adult, I have really gotten like way into it. And I just feel like a lot of my favorite series are fantasy series, right? So like Malazan Book of the Fallen, absolutely love those books, right? Dandelion Dynasty, love those books. The Game of Thrones books are fantastic. And then a whole, like the Greenbone Saga, sort of like fantasy in a modern setting. I love those books.
The Court of Thorns and Roses.
Listen, I probably would.
I'd slip that in there.
Yeah. I find I don't love it all, if I'm being honest. I've read some Brandon Sanderson books and it just wasn't my thing. I don't totally know why that is. I don't know if I felt like it was overly explanatory in the writing style, or if, I understand the whole like Sanderlanche thing, but it was just, it almost felt like too drawn out for me a little bit.
I've felt the same way. I mean, the older I get, more fantasy I've read, the pickier I've become. And Sanderson, I've enjoyed Sanderson. Just doesn't keep me, when I read him, for whatever reason, I don't feel a lot of motivation to keep reading him. Felt the same way about Robert Jordan. And people love both of them. I think they're just not for me.
Yeah, I've heard really mixed things on the Wheel of Time, and I'm sure I'll dip my toe in the water sometime, but but there's a lot of other stuff. I just like a few other, we both read the First Law series, love that. Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin, I love. And I don't know if we would consider the Locked Tomb to be fantasy. Well, if we're counting that as fantasy, that's probably my favorite one, I would say. But there's a lot of stuff I want to read. I want to read Robin Hobb, because I haven't read any of her stuff. There's some movies that I was like obsessed with as a child that I'm planning on reading over the next year, like Neverending Story, for example, The Last Unicorn, some other stuff like that I know were originally books, but I've never read, but I love the movie. So, I really enjoy it. I think there's certain writing styles within it that I don't love, and in that case, I kind of walk away, but it's definitely added a lot of richness to my reading life as an adult, for sure.
Me too, and I will say, for the Sanderson fans out there, I've read Sanderson stories that I also really enjoy. It's just overall, I think I need to read more. I need to give it more shots, but I did really enjoy some short stories that he wrote.
And from my end, I've read a couple. I really didn't enjoy them, but I respect his success. I've read a lot of interviews with him. He seems like a really classy guy. I also don't like Led Zeppelin, and I really respect them too. Sometimes it's just...
Please don't come for us, Sanderson fans or Led Zeppelin fans.
Yeah.
Actually, I
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, okay. Well, there
So
you
we're
go.
balanced out.
Very
Wait,
cool.
so
Okay.
just before we go on, you weren't reading fantasy as a kid. What were you reading?
I think I was really into like scary books, so like I really like as a young kid, like really into like the Goosebumps, the Fear Street, Christopher Pike, all of that kind of stuff. And then I got really into, these are very different ends of the spectrum, but I was partly really into like that kind of like kind of scary, unsettling modern stuff, like a lot of Chuck, I don't know how to say his last name, but like Chuck Palahniuk, who's like Fight Club and Survivor in those books, but also into like a lot of John Steinbeck. Like I've read pretty much everything by John Steinbeck, a lot of it multiple times. Cormac McCarthy, so a lot of like that kind of stuff. And I'm not quite sure. Like I said, there's tons of like fantasy movies and things like that I really liked, but for whatever reason, it just didn't call out to me as a reader until I got older.
I hear you.
Cool. Okay. Well, so this week is your pick. So why don't you tell us what we're reading?
We are reading Nifft the Lean by Michael Shea, published in 1982, won the 1983 World Fantasy Award. Also in contention for that award is actually an interesting group of books that I kind of want to check out. Fever Dream by George R. R. Martin. I don't know if y'all have heard of him. It's an antebellum vampire novel, so I'm interested. The Nestling by Charles Grant is a horror novel involving Native American mythology. I don't know much about that one.
I've read a few lists that have that on it.
Ooh, okay.
Yeah.
I gotta add that. The last one is an author. I read one of his books, and I want to read more. The Sword of the Lictor by Gene Wolfe, and it's the third volume of the Book of the New Sun.
You read one of his books recently, right?
Yeah, I read The Wizard and the Knight. It's a two-book. It's a duology. It's okay. I enjoyed it a lot. I found it to have really fun little tidbits and some great characters, really great language, very imaginative, but overall went on too long and it was very meandering, which I understand are very common criticisms of Gene Wolfe, but it's one of those books, my understanding from what I've read about it is like, it's like there's a lot of layers, a lot of depth, and the more you read it, the more you get out of it. So it's one of those books I might reread at some point.
I've heard really good things about that series.
Well, one of these days I'll get to it. It has won a lot of book awards, so if I see it, I'm gonna
might come up on here someday.
Yeah, I need a little more time for that one. I think it's a pretty big book. We like big books.
We do like big books. Cannot lie.
What's your one sentence review for this?
Here we go. In a world filled with the most terrifying and gnarliest demons and overwhelmed by the suffocating stench of death, ain't nothing gonna break Niff's stride. Ain't nothing gonna slow Niff down. Oh no, Niff's got to keep on moving.
God, that's fantastic. I got up my game. Nifft the Lean is a fun, fantastical, deeply grotesque romp that raises some big questions about humanity and our place in the cosmos.
Like that. I mean, yours is more helpful than mine.
But yours is fun.
So why don't you give us a little background? What can you tell us about Michael Shea?
So Shea was born in 1946 up in L.A. Fun fact, he hitchhiked twice across the U.S. and Canada. So he's a traveling man, much like our guy E. Richard Johnson from Silver Street a couple books ago. His career kicked off in 1970. We're going to skip ahead. He chanced on a battered copy of The Eyes of the Otherworld by Jack Vance in the lobby of a hotel in Alaska. He loved it. 4 years later, he wrote his first novel, A Quest for Symbolists, which was in homage to Vance. And I guess he got in touch with Vance, and Vance allowed it to become an authorized sequel to his Dying Earth series. I haven't read that big, very famous sword and sorcery series. I really want to give it a shot, especially after this one.
Purchased the first book of it because just looking at the reviews for this one after I read it, that book is brought up so many times that I was like, okay, I just need to buy this book now.
Yeah, I feel like we got to read it for context now. Yeah, so Shea, he had a number of jobs. He painted houses, teaching English as a second language. So he was even a night clerk in a flop house. And he did and so he wasn't just a novelist. He did this book, but then he got back into it in the later 70s. Between 79 and 81, he published a series of short stories, and then he published Nifft the Lean in 82, which is directly, it's a collection of short sword and sorcery stories that is modeled on Jack Vance. Publishing Adventures of Nifft, Nifft in the Mines of the Behemoth and the Arak. His work crosses over sci-fi and fantasy, and it's notable for the imaginative depiction of demons and the horror of the underworld. So that's got just a little hint of what's to come. I feel like we got to talk about the sword and sorcery subgenre a bit. Do you want to tell our readers what that is?
So sword and sorcery, when I think of that, I think of like your more classic, like 70s, 80s fantasy. You've got knight style figures, you've got wizards, you may have dragons, you've got usually a male protagonist who's operating with some kind of very strong like moral code. There might be there's quests involved usually, often to seek out some sort of key item, or I guess in that sense this does kind of meet that, is that there was always some type of like objective or like quest that was being sought out. Does that sound right to you?
That feels spot on to me. Google says it is defined by fast-paced, action-oriented tales focusing on personal, high-stakes battles rather than saving the world. It's 100% this book.
Yeah, I guess it is.
I think of Conan the Barbarian.
Yeah.
I think that's a classic one. Interestingly, this book reminded me of a book that I think was also riffing off of Jack Vance, Terry Pratchett's The Color of Magic, which is direct satire on this.
As soon as you texted me that was like all I could think about. Yeah, like that. You're right. It really does feel like Color of Magic is like exactly this book as a parody, like even with the way the stories are set up and everything else.
100%. Although I also started to notice like some modern fantasy that I like Joe Abercrombie, the First Law. That's kind of sword and sorcery too. Feel like he was riffing off of it at least. I'm starting to see echoes of it.
I could totally see that.
You know what I mean?
I also saw a lot of people describing Shea's writing as Lovecraftian, which they were saying not so much Nifft, but a lot of his other writing. I haven't read a ton of Lovecraft, but I'm just thinking about the idea of these like cosmic horror and what feel like really novel creatures. It kind of fits with me with the demons. And the idea that the real frightening thing is this unknown, this unknowable thing, rather than the more traditional sort of scary thing. And so that kind of fits too. That's just something to keep in mind when we're discussing it.
It's a great point, Nick. I hadn't put that together, but it does feel very Lovecraftian. These unimaginable horrors from another world creeping in. There's of the writing in this book. We'll talk about it. Right. What's next?
All right. So other than being my birth year, so maybe this book's going to hit a little extra personal note for me. What can you tell me about the context here?
Right. So 83, exciting year. We had Sally Ride, first woman in space. My cousin Nick was born.
Yeah. Very
exciting. Also had the first cell phone. McDonald's chicken nuggets were invented. Very important moment for my own son. An event I find really interesting that happened this year was the Abel Archer crisis in Europe. Are you familiar with that, Nick?
I don't think so.
So I watched a show on this recently. It's a German show called Deutschland 83, and it's like a sort of a thriller spy comedy. It was a big point of brinksmanship in the Cold War, where the Soviets were on high alert. They thought that NATO was going to launch an invasion, and Abel Archer was a joint military exercise that NATO did in 83. Which involved bringing troops to the borders and moving missiles around and that kind of thing. It was all, it was a military exercise. It was a war game. But the Soviets thought it was real. They thought it was real in part because, related to Abel Archer, NATO was also moving real missiles closer to the border. So it became this very tense moment where we were almost had a shooting war in Europe. Was de-escalated, and you'll have to find out for yourself. I wouldn't want to spoil that because I can't remember.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. Okay. Well, that's intense.
Yeah. All of these things have nothing to do with this book, but that'll set the context for where we are. V3.
Awesome. Okay, well then I think we should just get right into it. You said you love the writing. We could talk with the writing. Maybe even talk a little bit about its setup, because it's set up in sort of an unorthodox way, I would say.
The setup here is that a historian has collected these stories of the famous thief Nifft the Lean, and you get this historian's notes in between the stories commenting on how accurate he thinks the stories are and talking about how he came about the stories. So there's a story of the historian tracking down all these different tales, and then there's the stories within the book. So it's this multi-layered thing, which ends up being really interesting. I've read a lot of short story collections, but I've never read one with this setup, and it makes it really fun because you realize every story has a slightly different voice based on who is purported to have written it. Like if Nifft wrote it, or his friend wrote it, or a friend of a friend. Yeah, his ex wrote one. There's an unreliable narrator component to this, which is just, it's really fun. And within the book itself, it's commenting on what degree the narrator is unreliable.
Yeah, and even so, the prologue of sorts in this book is a eulogy. So sort of like part of the setup here is we're told that Nifft is dead, and this historian Shag Margold, I believe is the name, is eulogizing him, and he's the one who weighs in on the validity or the credibility of each of the stories we're going to read. But even in the beginning during that prologue or the eulogy, we can see that we have like some reasons to doubt his credibility also. I mean, there's a quote in there where he's talking about, maybe he can pay Nifft for some of these documents that he's given him. And he reports that Nifft said to him, "Enough of this, please, Shag. I can't take money from a man I admire as much as you. You're the most widely traveled and honest man I know." So right off the bat, when you're reading that and you're like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what kind of a picture we're ever going to get here. But then the reality is like, that's true with pretty much everything if you're looking at it historically. You know what I mean?
It's absolutely true. It's a commentary on history itself.
Yeah.
History is
sure.
written by someone, and that person has an opinion and a perspective, and there's no such thing as objectivity.
And I really liked the build into the first story. And the second, third, and fourth story is just like you hear from Shag, and then the story starts. But the first story, it's like, okay, you heard from Shag on the eulogy, and then the first story starts, and it's Nifft and his friend Barner, and then they're like up in the trees because they have to wait out some whatever creatures or whatever. And then Nifft then starts telling him the story that then becomes the first story. So it's just like
that's right,
layers and layers to get to the actual first story.
There's so much buildup just to get to the action. I remember reading that and being like, is this the no, okay, that's the story.
Yeah.
It just keeps going. It's practically satire on itself.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's so much stuff in it that is like legitimately scary and unsettling, and also like cool, spooky in like a cool way. But it also feels, like if we've got a Conan the Barbarian or whatever full sword and sorcery fantasy on this one side, and we've got, Discworld over here, like the Color of Magic that's openly trying to make light of a lot of it. I feel like this is somewhere in the middle because, as you said, I feel like Shea is writing some pretty hardcore fantasy stuff here, but you can also tell that there's a lot of humor in the book, and I really appreciated that.
It's very humorous. Like Nick said, there's a lot of dark imagery. Think of it as like it's metal. I don't know. That's always the word that comes to mind for me.
Totally.
But it's also lighthearted in a way. I think a lot of the books we've read have been very serious books. Silver Street's very dark, and Godmother Night is very deep. This book, we'll get to it. This book actually, I think, does address some interesting philosophical questions, but it's lighthearted. It's just fun.
Yeah. And I think some of that comes from who Nifft himself is. He kind of reminds me of Han Solo when we first meet him at the beginning of the original Star Wars movie. Like he's got a lot of like natural charisma. People seem to like him. He's kind of cocky, and he's just out there doing this stuff for his own personal gain. And obviously in Star Wars, he eventually does become like emotionally attached and involved to this whole like rebel cause. But up until then, I feel like that's very much Nifft. Like Nifft is he's a thief, but he's also like, at no point do you ever feel negatively about him. Like you feel like he's like one of the more honorable, noble people in the story, but like he's literally just either trying to save himself from being killed, or he's trying to risk his neck to get some kind of big payoff at the end, which he already says he's going to squander living it up once he gets it.
How'd you feel about the writing, Nick?
I loved it. I loved it. It wasn't, nothing about it was like, and maybe this is why I don't think of it as sword and sorcery so much, is like so much of this book is about this really unique vision of hell and the underworld, and the demons that are down there are described in these ways that felt so original to me, and felt so like when I'm picturing them, I'm like, man, I would never have pictured this. You know, you could have locked me in a room for a year and I would never have come up with these kinds of descriptions for these demons. And it's so scary. And and the description of it is amazing. And the smells kept coming up for me. Like he describes the smells a lot, like the smell of, and I feel like I've read a lot of things about underworlds, and like the fact that like the smell of death, this was the first time that was mentioned a lot. And that really added something for me. Cause like, of course it would smell like death in the underworld. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it felt very visceral. The descriptions, especially of the underworld and the demons, all of that is just, that's for me. I agree. That's what really sold me on this book. Just, it's so visceral. You really feel it. I would say his prose, I think it's flowery, but it's very clear, and it's a real pleasure to read. It's really fun.
This does not give anything away. Could I just read a little excerpt that I think will
Go
maybe
for it.
this will
Please.
highlight maybe what some people are calling purple prose, but which I agree with you is not at all. Flesh had begun to web and drape the bones. Not flesh, mind you, but just such gluey rags as comes before it is utterly gone. This foul paste spread, lumps of it rose within the ribs' cage like loaves in an oven, and the festoons on the rest of the skeleton thickened and wove and knit into the skin. And that skin began to stir, and then to crawl, and then to boil with worms. Yeah,
That's
and
amazing.
that's right. And like this exact scene is in the first story, and I was just like, I am in on this book 100% when I read that.
I remember that point. That was the point where I was like, okay, yep, that's where I'm in this. Like,
Yeah.
I get it now.
Yeah, this, and then there's the fact when I learned that you have to wrestle a lizard man in order to get into the underworld. I was just like, yeah, this book rules, and I don't even care if it ends up being good or not. I love it.
Yeah, I found myself just enjoying it scene to scene. I did not care about how it ended.
Yeah. That said, I think all 4 stories ended in some pretty cool ways.
Yes.
Which is just not that we're going to even touch on them, because I sometimes think in these types of reviews, people give away too much. But I felt really satisfied at the end of each of the 4 stories.
Each story is just a perfect little gem. Completely agree.
Yeah. What did you think? I mean, there's not a ton of them, but what did you think of the characters?
I've been thinking a lot about the characters. This is an old school sword and sorcery novel. You'd expect a lot of stereotype. They fit those stereotypes in some ways, but they didn't really in a lot of other ways. They never fit any specific mold to me. Nifft and his companions were both thoughtful and well read, when the world around them often perceives them as big lugs. This even comes up as a plot point in one story. Oh, I liked that, and I think the side characters too often felt very human. There were human motivations with some of them. Some of them were just sketches, and that's fine. It was very centered on them and what they were doing. My only critique with the characters is that they were a little too good at everything. He's a master thief. He's very smart. He's really athletic. He's good at everything. He's just in it for the money. He's very much a Han Solo kind of guy.
Yeah.
That's spot on. I'm curious what you think about this too. Like, if he wasn't as good at everything, if he was a little more clumsy or something, how would you feel about the story?
Yeah, I have been thinking about this a lot. Lean is, as you said, like he's like a scoundrel, and I feel like he's so good at what he does, right? He's like this incredible thief. He's also so likable, and you're very drawn to him. When he needs to be really smart, he's really smart. When he needs to be like very physically gifted, he's very physically gifted. in classic form of this genre, there's some allusions for both he and Barner to their sexual prowess. I think okay, from a strict literature standpoint, yes, that does take some of the tension away from the conflicts that we are seeing, this is not a character with much depth. I don't think there's any characters in this that have a ton of depth to them. But we're also getting short stories, and I honestly, I agree with you that there are some interesting big ideas that are put forth here, and there's genuine things about I wonder how they're going to get out of this. It almost made me think of a James Bond movie, right? You're okay, I know this is going to work out, but how will it, And that's sort of what it felt like, right?
Yes.
And
James Bond's good at everything.
Yeah,
and you're okay with it because it's fun.
Exactly. And I think there were a lot of movies and a lot of shows and a lot of books like this in the 80s and the 70s where it was just we've got our hero and we really like him. I'm pretty sure it was always a him, and just can't wait to see how he outsmarts everyone and outfights everyone and, gets the girl and does all this stuff. Yeah, so that's what it was to me. It was just it was a really fun set of stories with cool imagery and really dark, scary stuff in it. But yeah, I mean, I didn't feel like there was a ton of depth to these characters, and I was okay because I didn't feel like it was trying to put on airs otherwise. I felt like the point of view here is pretty clear.
These stories are about having fun, and the characters are not built to be particularly introspective. I do completely agree with that, but as you did allude, I came in expecting that, and that's what I got, right? But there was an unexpected depth in these big philosophical questions that it just sneaks into these stories. They're not he's not hitting you over the head with them. You'll blink and you'll miss it with some of these. Even once I caught onto this, I even had to think about a couple of stories and be what is he trying to say here? But what I like about this is there is a cohesiveness in each story. He is trying to ask a question. I like that a lot. We'll talk about that in the spoiler cast.
Yeah.
But
I do agree. It almost felt like Star Trek in that way, kind of, where every episode, there's some kind of moral dilemma that's being grappled with.
Yeah, I also just to tag on to that, he never gives us definitive answers to any of these questions. He sticks them in, he asks them, and you're left kind of mulling it over by the end of the story, but he never hits you over the head with any sort of moralizing, any sort of real opinion about it.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I do like Nifft as sort of a vehicle for that, just in the sense that Nifft is, there's no pretension there about what he's trying to do. He is, I mean, obviously he looks out for his close sidekicks, right? Who are his boys, but otherwise he's out for himself and just trying to have a good time. And that feels like enough. I didn't begrudge him ever for that, which was an interesting thing. But that I think, so anyway, yeah, having this character that is not so married to any sort of moral stance or trying to save anybody from anything made that an interesting, I like that as a character through which to explore these philosophical questions, because he felt very objective, and I feel like sometimes these characters are a bit more idealistic, if that makes sense.
That's a really good point. If he had been given more depth, if he had been given more complications, it would have been harder to see him as an objective character. He's really the Nifft. I see Nifft as kind of almost the oil for the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
The real good thing in these books is in these stories, it's the world around him, the world you see. You hear us both talk about the descriptions of the crazy things that happen and that he sees, and that he experiences. That's where the strength in this book is.
Yeah, and one thing I will say about Nifft that I feel like does come through, when you're saying he's a foil to the world, at the very beginning of the first story, but before the actual story starts, he says to Barner, "Well, it is foolish to deny the dark around us. It is futile to exaggerate it. And I make bold to say that I am not the only one of my countrymen who could profit from taking this admonition to heart." And I feel like that really kind of like summed up him going into this whole thing, which is just like, there's going to be some pretty dark and wild shit going on. And like, he's not going to deny it, but like, he's not going to be like, he's not going to let it get it down. He's not going to like, he's not going to get too negative. And yeah. So I like that idea that he's a foil for the world, because the world is fucked.
It's real messed up. There's a lot of dark shit in here.
Yeah. Anything else stood out to you that you want to touch on?
Will, I just do want to note, in addition to the good writing and, all that, this guy's a poet. I really enjoy his poetry in this book.
Yes.
And I'll leave you to discover that for yourself. And it's sparse. There's not like a lot of it. There's plenty of authors, including one of my favorites, Stephen Erickson, who do a lot of poetry. Will say this one thing I'm not crazy about in his books is the poetry.
It's Stephen Erickson's. Yeah, I would agree with you.
It's like sometimes it's good, but it's usually This is real. It's real tight. I think you're gonna enjoy it.
Okay, let's think of a rating scale.
I got one. Possets.
Oh yeah.
Did you notice they kept using the word posset?
Yeah, I did notice that. Yeah.
My parents got really into possets like one time when I was a teenager, so I know that's the only reason I know what that word is.
Amazing.
It's like it's a drink. It's like a punch, colonial punch or something.
Yeah. All right, so you're up first. Why don't you give it to us?
Okay, I'm gonna give it 4 possets. And I should say I've given every book so far 5 possets. And I feel like I need to differentiate myself. I really enjoyed this book. I think Nifft could have had a bit more depth.
Yeah. I'm going to do the same. And it's hard for me too, because I've also been given 5s. My Instagram account is literally 5-star book reviews, and I give everything 5 because that's
why you call it 5-star book reviews.
Yeah. Because I give everything 5 stars, and I gave this 5 stars on there. But on this podcast, where we're trying to hold a little bit more of a line, I'm going to give it 4 possets because the reason it's hard for me is because I just feel like this is like someone else's art, and I really, I don't know, it's cool. I'm reading this creative thing that somebody else made, and it's cool, and I feel like even if I don't love it, or I don't know, but I'm going to go with 4 here because this is the job, right? This is the job that we've taken on.
The tough job we're doing. We're being real harsh here.
Yeah. So I'm going to give it 4 for a lot of the same reasons you said. Like, I love a little short story collection like this, but in the same way that like The Color of Magic in Discworld does not necessarily deliver the same substance that some of the like full length. It is 4 really fun stories about a really fun character, and yeah, there are some interesting questions posed in some of these, but they're not questions that I have spent a ton of time thinking about since I finished reading it. I've mostly just been thinking about like, wow, that book was so fun. That book was so metal. Yeah. That was so cool, right? Like, that's what I've been thinking about. And that's awesome. And that's a great reason to read it. I'm not going to give it 5 stars or 5 possets.
Completely agree.
In terms of who should read this, like, if you like fantasy, if you would be into like stories of the underworld, and cool ass demons and funny stuff, and you're not bothered by things like, you're pretty sure this character is going to like outsmart everyone, and you have trouble putting that aside, then maybe this book's not for you. There are some mystical female characters, but there aren't any, I don't think, just normal female characters, but there's also just not that many characters, but that was pretty standard, I think, for the genre also. So, given just like the general demographics of an 80s fantasy novel, you should expect that will be the demographics of this.
That's exactly right. If you don't mind some blood, guts, viscera, smells, some bodiness, and I think you'll like this book. But if you want to avoid those things, I would avoid this book. It's a really fun book. I completely agree with everything you said.
Yeah. I think one big takeaway for me, and what I would say to people listening, I think I have been hesitant to go back to older fantasy and older sci-fi, partly because I just assume that like these older kind of tropes of these stories have been built on, and it's probably going to read as like even if it was groundbreaking then, that it's probably going to not feel that exciting to me now. And my experience so far has been that is not the case at all.
Yeah, not at all. This was unlike anything I've ever read.
Yeah, 100%. Like this felt like this. Yeah, you could have told me that this was written this year, and I would have been like, "Whoa, this dude is crazy. This is awesome," you know. And so that's just made me rethink like how I think about these older books. And I should have known it because, like think about music, right? Like that music in the 70s and 80s is also awesome, you know. And so I don't know why I necessarily felt that way. And I think that will extend to the next book we're going to read. It is also like feels so original and fresh to me. And that is Babel 17 by Samuel R. Delany, winner of the 1967 Nebula.
Can't wait. I haven't read that one.
Very last note. So sorry.
Yes.
Nifft the Lean, not easy to find. It's out of print.
Yes. It's out of print. The hard copies are expensive. You can find it online as an ebook or PDF for free download in a couple places. You just got to do some Googling. Yeah, so it's really hard to find, though. It's so weird. It's an award-winning fantasy novel, and it's very good. One thing this podcast is making me realize is how many books we do not have access to.
Yeah.
Like this, it's like lost media.
Yeah, and especially like given that there are these like pirated, dare I say, copies out there on different websites, I'm just like, why? I mean, maybe there's like I don't understand the industry at all, but you know, like why isn't, I don't know, I don't get it. But yeah, so you're welcome everyone for that.
I invite readers to send some letters and explain the industry to us.
Yeah, for sure. But he died in 2014, and I did see that some of his books have been reprinted since then. So who knows? Maybe Nifft the Lean will get a reprint someday.
Here's hoping. I'll be first in line.
All right, well, that's going to do it. Thanks everyone for listening. If you've read Nifft, or if you just really like to hear spoilers about books you haven't read, then join us on the spoiler cast. And if not, then we'll see you next time for Babel 17.
All right, thanks everyone.